Good morning, everyone. It's Tuesday, and I'm glad you tuned back in. This week, what we're doing is looking at American history from a Christian perspective. And unlike what we did a month or two ago, looking at early American history, we're looking at it in the 1800s, mid 1800s mostly, and certainly today, we're talking about a person and a book, actually, that I, at one point in my life, didn't know very much about. I more recently have because I read the book. And if I were to ask you, what is the book that sold the most copies throughout all the 1800s, would you get the answer right? And of course, the first answer is the Bible. So it's in addition to the Bible. What book sold the most copies in America in the 1800s? And we'll get to it in just a moment. Give you a moment to think about it, and you'll get it somewhere along the line, I'm pretty sure, as we talk about the author and the person and what the topic is. Let me give you our verse for today, though. And the reason this is the verse for the day is it is the verse that led the author of that book to come to know Jesus as it was lady, Savior. That verse is John 15:15. That's a great one for us to have as our verse for the day. Jesus talking, and he says, I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. Now, that verse impacted the life very much of Harriet Beecher. Harriet Beecher, does that ring a bell yet? Well, she was a teenager when she heard a sermon by a pastor, Lyman Beecher, and he preached from John 15:15, and it impacted her life so much. And she writes later, she says, I just sat intent listening to the sermon, and I was absorbed. Oh, how I needed such a friend. It took her breath away. As soon as her father came home and was seated, and she went home to see him, I went up to him and fell in his arms, saying, Father, I have given my life to Jesus, and Jesus is my friend. That's what did it for Harriet Beecher. Now, as she grew up, you probably know her. Well, actually, when she was 21, and that made her in 1832, she moved to Cincinnati and married a professor named Calvin Stowe. So she became Harriet Beecher Stowe. Do you know her book yet? Well, the thing is, she started writing and did Bible studies, and she got known throughout the nation, actually, in the 1830s, as a writer of devotional materials and Bible studies and also fiction. But then something happened that impacted her life again, and that is that her good friend, Elijah Lovejoy, was murdered. He was a publisher, a newspaper man. He was murdered for his abolitionist views. And Harriet and her whole family were just appalled that such a thing could happen. And Harriet's brother, Edward, said, you're such a good writer. Use the pen as you can. Write something that would make this whole nation feel and understand how absurd slavery is and accursed. Reading that letter, she decided that she would see how the Lord led her and began praying about it. And then on June 5th, 1851, she started writing and had her first chapter of the book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, published. And for 40 weeks, it was published in a weekly paper. She was so humble about it. She says, I was an instrument in God's hands. To him alone should be given the praise. So on March 13th, 1852, a publisher put all her 40 articles together in a book. And that book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, sold for 56 cents a copy. The first 3,000 books sold in the first day. They had to print again. And in its first year, 300,000 copies were sold. And eventually, over 1 million copies were sold just in Great Britain and hundreds of thousands in the United States. Uncle Tom's Cabin became the best-selling book of the century. And it so inflamed the nation against slavery that social critics credit it with setting the stage for the Civil War. And it all happened as she wrote it because Jesus was her friend. And that's how she lived her life. A few years ago, I looked on Amazon and bought Uncle Tom's Cabin. It is so well written and it is so exciting. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to do so. It's long, but I gotta say, it really opened my eyes. I can see where the nation eyes were opened because she makes it so clear about some of the evils of slavery that I had no idea of, including for me, the most heart-wrenching is how she chronicles the separation of families and mothers from children. It's shocking. It shocked me, and it shocked our nation. And eventually, it says her nickname or how she's known, the little woman who wrote the book that made the Great War. What a life, and how God used a simple person to change American history. It's amazing. But back to that, it all goes back to John 15:15. Jesus is our friend. And she saw him that way. And I tell you, if you haven't read the book, or another way to go about it, the movie Harriet. Now that's about a lady named Harriet Tubman. But having read the book and seen the movie, it's almost, I don't know how they're connected, because Harriet Tubman was a real person and the movie chronicles her life. But her life so very, very much parallels the life that Uncle Tom's Cabin described. If you don't have the time or ability to read the book, I would encourage you. You'll get the same message out of the movie Harriet. And it's available on many, many different services. So you can view it. I'm sure on Netflix. It's $4 to watch it on YouTube, or any other, like Redbox, $4. Well worth the investment. It's an exciting, to me, and how it fits in this week. Jesus and God used a lady to impact the nation, and it's out of his grace, but it's out of, obviously slavery was wrong and evil and accursed, but we had to wake up to that fact, and God used this book, that book, to change the course of a nation. This nation is impacted by Jesus. We saw it again today. We'll see it again in a different way tomorrow. See you then.
And I won't worry about tomorrow.